Before Bruce Lee, the term Kung Fu in America was either a joke or a mystery. He turned it into a philosophy, a science, and a weapon. This isn't just the story of a martial artist. It is the code of a man who intercepted the fists of tradition and racism, and in doing so, changed the world forever. In the mid-20th century, the world of martial arts was a fortress of rigid tradition. In San Francisco's Chinatown, where Lee started his first school, the established masters viewed his willingness to teach non-Chinese students as a profound betrayal. This tension culminated in a now legendary private fight against Wong Jack Man. Lee won, but the grueling, messy reality of the fight left him exhausted and deeply dissatisfied. He realized that his traditional Wing Chun, while effective, was not enough. It was too rigid, too limited for the chaos of a real street fight. This was the first wall he faced, a wall of dogma that prized purity over practicality. In response, his school in Oakland became a direct rebellion against the secrecy. It was a melting pot of cultures and disciplines where anyone with a genuine desire to learn was welcome, regardless of their race. This open-door policy was an unprecedented act of defiance. He wasn't just teaching techniques. He was creating a community built on a shared philosophy of growth and self-discovery. It was here, in this small, revolutionary space, that the first seeds of his global impact were sown. The second wall was even higher and more insidious. In America, Hollywood portrayed Asian men through a humiliating lens. They were either the comical, buck-toothed servant like Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's, or the sinister, ponytailed villain, an archetype perfected by characters like Fu Manchu. They were never the hero. They were never portrayed as strong, charismatic, or desired. For a young, confident, and fiercely proud Bruce Lee arriving in America, this wasn't just an insult. It was a cultural lie that he was determined to shatter. These two systems, one of martial arts and one of culture, were broken. They needed a reboot. Bruce Lee's training was not a dojo. It was a laboratory. His personal library contained over 2,500 books, ranging from boxing manuals to texts on Taoist philosophy and the teachings of Jiddu Krishnamurti. He studied the footwork of Muhammad Ali, the lead hand principle of fencers, and the grappling techniques of wrestlers. He saw the human body not as a vessel for ancient, unchanging forms, but as a machine to be optimized. He was one of the first martial artists to embrace weight training, electrical muscle stimulation, and a strict nutritional regimen, meticulously recording his findings like a scientist searching for a breakthrough. This scientific approach extended to his legendary physique. He was a pioneer of modern fitness, focusing on concepts that were revolutionary for his time. He obsessed over core strength, famously developing his abdominal muscles to the point of unparalleled definition. He believed that a martial artist's power came not from brute size, but from lean, functional muscle. This dedication to conditioning was a core part of his code. To win a fight, you must first master the machine that is your own body. That breakthrough was Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. The name itself was a philosophy. It was not about blocking an attack, but about intercepting the opponent's intention before the attack could even be completed. Its central code was a direct assault on tradition. Absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, add what is uniquely your own. It was a philosophy of ultimate pragmatism. It wasn't a style, it was a system for personal evolution. And to prove its efficiency, he developed a technique that defied belief, the one-inch punch. It wasn't magic. It was a perfect application of physics and biomechanics, a kinetic chain of energy, starting from the feet, torquing through the hips, exploding through the lats, and focusing the power of the entire body into a single terrifying point. It was the ultimate proof that his innovation wasn't just theory, it was a reality that could shatter bone. With his innovative philosophy perfected, Bruce Lee turned his attention to the second wall, Hollywood. Cast as the sidekick, Kato, in The Green Hornet, his dynamic, fluid movements and intense charisma were unlike anything American audiences had ever seen. He was so charismatic that he became the show's breakout star, receiving more fan mail than the lead actor. But Hollywood, while happy to profit from his talent, still wasn't ready for an Asian lead. He poured his soul into developing a concept for a show called The Warrior, about a Shaolin monk in the American West. The studio executives loved the idea, and then gave the lead role to a white actor, David Carradine, renaming it Kung Fu. This rejection was the final catalyst. Frustrated but unbroken, Bruce returned to Hong Kong, not in defeat, but as a strategic move. There, he wouldn't have to ask for permission to be the hero. He would build the hero himself. With movies like The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, he did something revolutionary. He presented an Asian man who was powerful, defiant, and the undisputed star. The films shattered box office records, making him the biggest star in Asia. He had become a symbol of national pride. The rebel had proven the system wrong, and Hollywood, smelling money, came knocking once again. Even before Hollywood came calling, the impact of his Hong Kong films began to ripple across the globe. In Chinatowns from London to New York, his movies played to packed theaters, creating an underground cultural phenomenon. Western martial artists and film directors saw these raw, energetic films and recognized that a seismic shift was happening. The quiet buzz grew into a roar, forcing Hollywood to acknowledge a crucial fact. They hadn't just rejected an actor, they had let a global superstar slip through their fingers. Enter the Dragon, the first ever co-production between a Hong Kong studio and Hollywood, was Bruce Lee's ultimate victory. He wasn't a sidekick, he was the writer, the fight choreographer, and the philosophical soul of the film. In the iconic Hall of Mirror scene, he wasn't just fighting the villain, he was fighting illusion, seeking the true self, a physical manifestation of his code. The film became an international phenomenon, cementing his status as a global icon. His most famous quote, "Be water, my friend," became the final layer of his code. It was the core principle of Jeet Kune Do, to be formless, adaptable, yet powerful enough to crash through any obstacle. It was how he thought, but it was also how he lived. He had to be like water, to navigate the rigid walls of martial arts tradition and flow around the immovable racism of Hollywood. Yet, there was a profound contradiction within the man himself. The philosopher who preached of formless, flowing water was, in his personal life, a man of incredible intensity, obsessive drive, and a notoriously short temper. This internal conflict between the calm sage and the fiery warrior was perhaps his greatest battle. It was a reminder that his code wasn't a destination he had reached, but a path he was constantly and very humanly struggling to follow. Tragically, just before the film's release, Bruce Lee died at the age of 32. But his code was already immortal. He didn't just kick down the door, he shattered the entire frame, leaving a space for generations of new heroes, from Jackie Chan to the creators of the UFC, to walk through. And that is the architecture of the legacy of Bruce Lee. Remember, history is more than a story. It's a code, and there is always another layer to decrypt. Subscribe and continue the investigation with us.